I Hate Politics is a podcast dedicated to exploring a human activity we love to hate. We look at human life, culture, economics closest to us in our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and in our local governments. Together, we'll explore how politics is central to getting things done in societies where we treasure diverse views and preferences. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I've spent my life studying politics, and I know this. Unless we want to live in a dictatorship or a monarchy, we are stuck with politics. Politics is more than just Trump, Biden, or elections. It's how we fix potholes, make our streets safer, where we put our schools, and decide who goes to them. It's about coming together as a community. It's about us. Let's go find those stories.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Clemens-Cope, a junior at Richard Montgomery High School and a climate activist with Sunrise Rockville. Sunrise Rockville, other Sunrise Hubs, and over 50 other climate and justice groups across Maryland all stand with local farmers to limit solar in the Ag Reserve. First, we recognize that when we fight for climate justice, we must also fight for economic justice. Opening the Ag Reserve to solar power the way that Montgomery County's original bill did threatened to push renting farmers off of the most productive land available to them and favored the wants of big solar companies over the needs of local farmers. Building an economy that is friendly to corporations instead of human beings is what got us into the climate crisis, and prioritizing solar companies above farmers is not going to get us out of it. Farmers are critical to the climate fight, and we need to partner with and help them, not hurt them. The Ag Reserve also plays an important role in protecting the health of our communities, preventing high-emitting, car-oriented development from taking over, preserving local water quality, and supporting regenerative agriculture. We should lean into these possibilities, the Ag Reserve's unique strengths, rather than giving the land over to solar companies. There are also lots of opportunities for solar that the county hasn't even tried. We need to do an independent analysis of land use and potential solar sites to determine whether solar on our farmland is even needed. Our county is full of impervious surfaces and non-agricultural land where we should site solar panels before placing them on fertile agricultural lands or forests. Demanding that the county act on the climate crisis and that the county site solar equitably are both necessary components of the same goal. Our county has so many ways to implement solar and other renewables, so we cannot allow them to sacrifice county residents, local farmers, when we don't have to.
Eleanor Clemens-Cope and Montgomery County Council member Hans Riemer should be close allies. They are both passionate about climate action, extraordinarily knowledgeable about the issues, not afraid of taking bold action, and impatient with excuses. Yet when it came to putting solar panels in Montgomery County's protected agricultural reserve, they came down on opposite sides. In this episode, just in time for Earth Day, I talk with Councilmember Riemer to dissect why his proposal to change the zoning law to allow solar panels in the Ag Reserve failed and what it means for climate action at the local government level. In a recent article, Washington Post reported that Montgomery County had faltered in taking climate action after setting ambitious goals. The article quoted Adriana Hochberg, climate czarina, in county executive's office as saying, "Developing climate policy and reducing greenhouse gases is not like flicking a magic wand." But what's the holdup? Climate deniers in the county have no political influence. Fossil fuel companies are not running sophisticated lobbying campaigns here. Instead, there is an incredibly strong environmental lobby. The powerful voices of Hans Riemer and Eleanor Clemens-Cope are demanding action. Money is always an issue, but recently the county approved the Housing Opportunities Commission to raise bond money for social housing projects and could conceivably issue similar renewable energy bonds to move the county forward. The Biden administration is crafting a new infrastructure bill, which is going to include significant green infrastructure spending. So the absence of action is in fact puzzling. Usually the inner workings of governments are hard to see, another item in the I Hate Politics docket. But the spat over solar panels in the Ag Reserve was public. And it showed that the real debate on climate action is between conservationists and climate activists. Hans Riemer, who had introduced the zoning text amendment to allow solar panels to be installed in the Ag Reserve, did not end up voting for his own bill because it had been amended to a point where his intent was lost. The plan, based on a Maryland state program called Community Solar, provides incentives to companies to invest in solar generation and sell to the grid while notionally assigning the credits from the sale to homeowners who can reduce their electric bill. It was a way to incentivize collective action because individual families are not able to put solar on every roof. As I learned more about the issue, asking the question that Eleanor asked, why does the county not put solar on its buildings' roofs first? I found out that the standoff between conservation and climate action is wider than we know. School building roofs in particular, for example, are legally required to follow stormwater management practices, a conservation imperative, which is seen by school officials as conflicting with solar panel installation, a climate action imperative. This can be resolved, of course, but the resolution is yet to come. Later in the episode, Andrew Saundry talks to Will Roberts of the Montgomery County Rental Alliance about the eviction crisis. In this episode, we use music from a locally composed full-length musical called Sunflower, the story of Amalie and Vincent. Composer Premila Mistry is a music teacher in DC Public Schools. Her collaborator, Laura Gully, used to live in Northern Virginia but now lives in Texas. The choir includes DCPS students. If you want to showcase your music on the podcast, please email ihppod@gmail.com. The Maryland General Assembly ended the 2021 session with historic new legislation, many with veto-proof majorities that the Republican governor of the state, Larry Hogan, cannot undo. The blueprint for Maryland's future alters and enhances education funding in the state. The police reform and accountability laws seek to transform public safety. Several other bills passed, including ending private ICE detention facilities in the state, more water testing in schools for lead, school districts being required to put out renewable power generation numbers. The bill to end at-large voting for district seats on county boards of education and county commissioners around the state at large did not pass. So we are going to continue with this anachronism for at least another 2 years. The big startler from the General Assembly was that between opening and closing day, the state went from deficit to surplus budgets because of the large COVID relief package received from the federal government. Many counties, which had also been expecting deep shortfalls, also found themselves with more money. We will look closely at the implications of this windfall for state and local budgets in a future episode soon. Montgomery County is now in budget season, and if you want to see your local government budget being made, you can do it from the comfort of your living room. Proceedings are broadcast and recorded for later viewing. If you Google Montgomery County Council proceedings video, it is the first search hit. I'll be back with Hans Riemer. Hans Riemer, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Sunil.
Can you explain why it is important from your perspective to put solar panels in the Ag Reserve?
What's really exciting and what makes this battle worth fighting is that we actually have a strategy. There is a vision of how we're going to stop climate change and ultimately reverse it and restore, the climate. And it's about how to reduce emissions. Well, almost all of the emissions that we generate come from, our using fossil fuels either in our homes and buildings or in our cars.
Sure.
That's like, 80, 90% of the emissions are from one of those two things. So if we could power our homes or our buildings on clean energy and power our cars on clean energy, we will then have 80 to 90% of our energy use powered on clean energy. I'm an environmentalist, like through and through. I do all the little things that we do, like, I don't want to use the next plastic bag, and I don't ask for the straw, and I'll try to walk, and I'll try to, any way I can try to, on a daily basis, like reduce my impact. I often I'll do whatever I can, but that is no solution. That is not going to work. Like, we are not going to get where we need to go, hoping that people will, take all of these little teeny tiny individual actions in their daily lives, and that somehow that's going to add up to saving this climate on the kind of time frame that we need to act. We have to take very dramatic action to shut down coal in our grid and then shut down natural gas in our grid. And the only way we're going to do that is if alternative sources of fuel are affordable, and are available. And right now, like, it costs you, if you want to put solar on your roof, you're going to have to come up with thousands of dollars up front. In Maryland, thousands of dollars. I got a quote recently, 8 solar panels, $7,000 up front. I get paid back over 10 years. But if we're relying upon people to have $7,000 to put down towards their own individual contribution to the climate solution, that is no solution. That's no plan. That's a disaster. This is not going to work. So that's why we have to fight for scaled solutions for power generation that can massively move the needle and help us shut down coal and then shut down gas, one step at a time. We've got to take it to the next level. We need solar, we need wind, we need it everywhere, on everything, all the time.
So the question for you now is, despite making the compelling argument, why did your initiative fail?
I think it was a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For some, it's just the idea of the ag reserve, and they think the ag reserve is sort of sacred ground. It was interesting to hear people talk about it as though it was like Yellowstone, or Yosemite. Like, I've been to the ag reserve, I've been to Yellowstone. They don't really compare. I'm sorry. It's farmland. It's valuable. It's useful. To me, it is not particularly fundamentally different than, like, setting aside land for suburban neighborhoods or light industrial is not particularly different from setting aside land for farming. For a lot of people, the ag reserve is like sacrosanct and you shouldn't touch it. Well, farming and solar go together. And that was like the key point of the argument, was that farmers can actually do farming beneath solar arrays. They can graze sheep. They can plant pollinator-friendly plants that bring more bees to their crops and increase their yields. They can do all kinds of agriculture beneath solar arrays. So this is not a fundamental change of the ag reserve. So I was not saying like the ag reserve is bad or we shouldn't have it. I'm saying this is compatible with it. I certainly had anticipated that the farmers would be excited about this opportunity to diversify their income. Farming is a tough business to be in. It's very risky. And, I think that farmers are always looking for ways to, improve revenue. What you're seeing around the country elsewhere is that farmers are embracing solar as a way to, you got 500 acres, you put 30 acres in solar, and now you've got a much more stable business. In Montgomery County, it's a little different. There was 2 things we hit against. First, the farmers here, it turns out, a lot of them are farming someone else's land. A lot of the land is concentrated in a few number of hands. Mm-hmm. And though the farmers felt like they were more worried about losing farm land for their commodity farming than they were potential upside of blending in solar to the income stream.
You did the calculations, right? And are those calculations correct?
So if you're a landowner in the ag reserve, you would benefit from being able to put 15 acres of your land into the solar. Like,
Okay.
that was clear. The farmer can't compete with that lease rate. If you're a tenant farmer, which is generally what we have, the kind of farming that you do for overwhelmingly is corn and soy and other kind of commodity crops that have really large equipment. You've invested like millions of dollars in your whole business model. You've got your combines, and you've got all the ways that you store your grain, and then you've got the trucks. Like, you have a whole business built around growing corn. A lot of that corn, by the way, is going into like to feed chickens or to feed cattle. It's generally part of the meat production chain. If you're a corn farmer, you sell your corn to Mount Airy farms for chickens. You're not going to just say, okay, and then on this little piece over here, I'm going to do this kind of experimental thing where I graze sheep underneath the solar arrays, or I grow lettuce underneath the solar arrays. Like, you're not going to do that. It's just not what you do. So if you're a tenant farmer, what you see is, I'm going to get 15 fewer acres from that property owner. And so from my perspective, farming is going to continue no matter what. But from the agricultural sector's view in the ag reserve, well, it's not the farming that they do. And for them, it was an economic concern.
All right. So the tenants would not benefit, but the owners of the land would.
There were certainly farmers that we've heard from who said, this is great. This would, I would love to be able to do this. But the organized political voice of the farming community was, quite opposed to it. So that was, kind of unexpected. Some of the first meetings I had with it about the issue, I thought farmers were pretty open to it. They seemed like there was a divided view, but the politics of the issue kind of evolved. And
you hadn't seen the difference between tenants and farm owners.
Yeah, I mean, initially that wasn't, it wasn't clear that was a dividing line.
Okay. And now that you know that tenant farmers do not want it, could you fix your proposal?
I don't know. That's we're cutting to the heart of the issue, right? We're never going to stop climate change if we don't break the status quo. I had ideas that I thought provided even greater advantage for those, farming concerns. One of the ideas we had was we would use some of the revenue that would come in from the taxes on the solar to buy the farming easements on land in the ag reserve. So right now, the land is zoned for farming, but not a lot, not all of it by any stretch, not that much is in easements. And easements prevent any other future use. Zoning does not. Zoning can be changed at any time, but an easement is a contract, and it's forever. The real way to preserve the ag reserve for those farmers and for everyone is to put that land into easement. What we realized was, hey, we will generate millions of dollars in tax revenue from the taxes on the solar arrays. So we'll put that into buying easements. Wouldn't that be great? And it was interesting, actually. That didn't necessarily generate as much interest as I thought. So
why?
I don't know that folks are willing to solve this problem and work together. I think that this is just, it seems like a threat, and so we're gonna try to stop it no matter what.
A big part of the opposition comes from conservationists.
Right. So that is absolutely. There was a second thread of that whole argument, which is a conservationist thought that the ag reserve is a conservation, initiative akin to wilderness or ANWR, and solar, frankly, is like drilling in ANWR. I mean, that was a mindset about solar in the ag reserve. And the conservationist ethic is an important one. It's just that the problem is, in order for us to defeat climate change, we have to disrupt the status quo. We have to shake things up, and we have to mobilize at a massive scale, and we have to do things that we might not have thought be willing to do. Trying to hang on to what we have now or the way things are now isn't going to get us there. Allowing for targeted blending of solar with farming is a great example of, a ready solution for climate change. But we did really battle with a lot of conservationists who felt like a lot of misunderstandings of the ag reserve. A lot of people, you're chopping down forests. Like, I'm sorry, a cornfield is not a forest. It's not. Like, this is open space. I mean, I guess it's not, there aren't buildings on it, but this is land that is used. Like, this land is heavily used by a business operation. It's just an agricultural business operation. Does that make it open space? I don't think of that as open space. I think of it as land that's being heavily used.
Conservationists have a moral argument, right? They have constructed a moral argument. And part of that moral argument is that who decides what needs to be conserved? Their argument, perhaps, and I think it speaks to the question of whether a soybean field is conservation target or not, they have a moral argument, and they are also making the argument that they can decide what it is that needs to be conserved. And to top it all, they have real political power. So how do you get past all of that?
Yeah, well, I thought we had good answers for all that. First of all, what we were proposing was to continue the farming use. We weren't saying you're going to stop farming. And in fact, we're going to have farming that is unquestionably is more environmentally friendly, because the kind of farming you do beneath solar arrays, you no longer disturb the soil. So you carbon capture the soil, and you can graze sheep. So you're now reducing your need to import food. You can support pollinators, so the local bee populations that are being devastated. So you can improve soil health, which is like the number one thing in ag, and support local food. So I think we had a substantive answer to the theoretical concern of, are you conserving this or not? The harder part was people felt like once you do this, the next thing is you're going to develop the ag reserve.
Correct.
Like, first it's solar arrays, then it's 7-Elevens and suburban neighborhoods. And like, those things just don't go together. Like, that's not at all what we're talking about. We're talking about solar. That's it. That's all that we're talking about. End of story. We have to be able to get over that. And I think that could, I think we will get there. I believe that the way to get there is by our coalition learning what the path is to defeat climate change. And I think once people have a reason to change, then they will.
You think the problem is education, more awareness?
I think so. I think on this one, I think when you understand that there is actually a realistic way for us to get off of coal and get off of gas and get onto solar and get onto wind, when you realize, like, it doesn't take that much, it's achievable, we can do it, and we should do our share, then I think you begin to think differently about it. So we got a lot of angry emails from environmentalists, and when we replied and kind of walked through what the objectives were and what some of the safeguards that were built in, I think people wrote back and they said, yeah, that sounds pretty sensible.
So what environmental groups supported you?
We had very strong support from actually, climate-focused environmental groups. The Sierra Club, Montgomery County chapter, amazing advocacy. Then the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, which is really a statewide leader. It's the leading state voice in a lot of ways on climate policy. There's a group called Poolsville Green, which is an environmental policy and community group in Poolsville. We had a very strong support, but the environmental community was also divided. So groups that you might normally think, like 350 MoCo, 350 is supposed to be the most radical, and like they couldn't even get their act together to support this. It was too much change for them. So yeah, some of the groups sat it out, and but I think that at the end of the day, I really do believe it's about education for the environmental community. And I think for the farming community, it's about, providing a path that's kind of more of a win-win. And I think we have that. I just think we didn't quite get the politics right. We got to keep working on it.
We'll be right back. I met an MCPS student, Eleanor Clements Cope, who's a passionate climate activist and student leader in the climate movement. She's extraordinarily well informed, incredibly intelligent, and just whip smart. And when I asked her about solar in the Ag Reserve, she said this ain't it. Do you think this is an awareness problem? Based on Eleanor, I'd say no.
Again, I don't think that it's really well understood how we're going to generate solar and why we should care that much. We tend to think of solar as a rooftop issue. Solar is for people to put on their rooftops. That's how solar works.
Mm-hmm.
That is not how solar is going to actually solve the problem. And until our side understands that the only way solar is going to truly solve this problem is if you have solar fields on the ground. That is the educational barrier that we have to get through. Last weekend I went to IKEA. They're building a huge solar array over the parking lot at IKEA.
Sure.
You can see why it is really a very challenging solution. It's a massive structure. It has to be a structure that won't blow over onto the shoppers who are parking their cars in a lot of wind. Like this really substantial steel girders. It's like this project's been going on for months. Like that thing costs millions and millions and millions of dollars. IKEA can do it because they have like a 30-year, 50-year payback time, and it makes perfect sense, and they have a strong social commitment. But on a farm, you don't have to do that. You don't have to. There's no building code about what happens if the arrays fall over on people because there's no people. So when they put solar arrays in the fields, it's like they are dropping like fence posts into the ground. They just punch them in and then they move on. They punch them in. And the cost difference between that model is so much less that the solar energy is now like it's really affordable to produce.
Okay.
And that is how we take solar to scale. That's how solar actually shuts down coal, is by having it mounted on the ground, not just on our rooftops and our parking lots.
Again, very compelling. I agree. The issue, though, is people aren't buying it, right?
Not yet.
Yeah. And so what is that pathway to victory? How do you get there? If it's only education, then we are waiting. We have a horizon that's
a great question. So I'll give you a provocative answer. What I was trying to achieve is solar energy through the consent of the community. I wanted to pass a law that would allow for this to happen. That's not usually the way that energy generation works. The PSC can override any local government.
Can you say what PSC is for our listeners?
The Public Services Commission. It's the regulatory body for energy. So if we don't do it in this kind of tailored, community supporting way, the PSC is just going to roll over. They're going to have to roll over everything with like a bulldozer. Maryland, we have a goal of 50% of our energy from clean sources by 2030. And we have to produce, according to the law that we passed, which is related to balancing the grid with our regional partners, other states, 14% of that energy has to come from inside Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And they estimate that they need about 40,000 acres of farmland to be used with solar. statewide. That is how we're going to generate enough clean energy. The state policymakers have looked this through, and they've concluded that that's how we're going to generate enough clean energy to get to a 50% clean grid. What environmentalist doesn't want us to have a 50% clean grid? And I think it's incumbent upon everyone to say, well, if you don't support this solution, then what's your solution? We know we also need wind, and we're going to do offshore wind on a big scale. The PSC, they have the power to just override local zoning and approve 50 acre, 100 acre, 200 acre, 500 acre solar farms. And if we do it that way, you're not going to get necessarily the same kind of combination use like grazing and pollinator planting and all that kind of stuff that we were trying to do.
What about the argument that if you do it at Maryland level, maybe Eastern Shore can do it and we don't have to do it in Montgomery County?
Yeah, well, that's the core of the NIMBY argument, for no solar in the ag reserve, is let other counties do it, chew up land somewhere else.
But if land is really cheaper there, why wouldn't you do it there?
Well, it's not really cheaper. The ag reserve is farmland is not terribly different in price than it is in Frederick or Carroll County or Kent County, wherever. I feel like we should do our share. That's an ethic of conservation and sustainability that, we should try to provide for our own needs as much as we can.
What about the political argument, right? Now, they say we rolled over Hans Riemer. We are now getting, some restrictions in Howard County. Why can't we go after Maryland, which is doing this? What about that political argument?
Again, the PSC ultimately has a mandate to help deliver the clean energy. The Maryland State Legislature said we want 50% clean energy, and we're trying to raise that to 100%, actually. That's supposed to be achieved. And local communities can try to enact zoning ordinances to block solar, but the PSC can override that. The state has the ability to override that. So what you're going to get blocking of the more careful, thoughtful, and agriculture supporting proposals like what I put forward.
Are you optimistic at this point?
Yes and no. I feel like it feels good to feel like we have a plan, to feel like there's actually a way to wind down emissions. However, it's not encouraging that a community like Montgomery County, we weren't able to enact something as simple as blending farming and solar. So that's very discouraging. I mean, this county has generally been an environmental leader, and this was a perfect opportunity for us to lead on both agriculture and climate. That didn't happen. But, I get more optimistic when I think about just not giving up. And fortunately, I think council members sort of felt like assertions were made that they thought we were going to get solar from the ordinance. And so, we're going to see. My feeling is in a couple of years, there's not going to be anything to speak of. And then we're going to come back and say, this has to change. Getting involved in this fight has made me feel much more personally confident that there is actually a possible solution. I think we need a conceptual framework here. And to me, it's exciting that we have one with electrification. And I think the more we talk about it, the more battles like this, the more it's going to catch on. And, that's how social change happens.
Okay. Hans Riemer, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back. What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Hans Riemer? First, the attempt to put solar panels in the agricultural reserve fell to an alliance between conservation groups who saw the solar panels as encroachment into green space they valued and feared a slippery slope toward rapid development of the ag reserve, and tenant farmers who saw the possibility of solar leases as increasing their rent costs. It should be noted that tenant farmers in the ag reserve are the bigger players hold bigger parcels of land, and have greater influence within the Farm Bureau, the all powerful political body that has intermediated government policy for farmers for decades. An alliance between conservationists and the Farm Bureau, or in the case of offshore wind between conservationists and fishermen's associations, for example, wherever it exists, is going to be politically powerful. Climate activists who ignore the alliance do so at the peril to their own agenda. Second, the moral power of conservationists is not ephemeral, but rooted in the mitigation and of climate dangers provided by trees and vegetation. As a straw poll while preparing this episode, I asked my 1,800 Facebook friends whether they will cut down trees around their homes to be able to put solar panels on their roofs. I got 113 responses, and maybe 4 said yes, they would cut trees for solar panels. This is both an appreciation of the trees themselves, but also a classic collective action problem, where individuals do not want to make a sacrifice to achieve a common purpose, in this case, a changed energy profile. Third, the community solar program crafted by the state of Maryland, and which brought up the question of solar panels in the Ag Reserve in the first place, was a solution to this collective action problem. So if individual families didn't want to cut trees around their home, a community solar company could gather up a bunch of families, a large bunch of families, if you will, and put up solar panels somewhere else, feed the grid from there, but enjoy the benefits in reduced electric bills at home. But given electric rates, the only way community solar projects can become viable is to put panels into the ground. Putting solar panels on rooftops and impervious surfaces, as Eleanor Clemens Cope says she wants, means that community solar projects would not be profitable and therefore lose commercial interest. And as most estimates I have seen say, putting rooftop panels on every county building will not generate enough power to significantly alter our energy profile, at least not enough to arrest climate change at any rate. The urgent need for and technological possibility of changing the energy profile is the moral argument of climate activists. In the moral standoff between climate action and conservation, the conservationists, however, label energy-focused climate activists as selling out to big business. On the other hand, climate activists call conservationists NIMBYs, those who want to block development at all costs. Hans Riemer has promised to come back with a better proposal. And Eleanor Clemens Cope is also smarter than to leave it all just there. Separately, she and I have talked about modern monetary theory and its avocation of unlimited printed money to fund all Green New Deal projects. I will be back with Andrew Saundry and his interview with Will Roberts of the Renters Alliance.
First, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and about the work that you do with Renters Alliance.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Andrew. Happy to chat with you. So I'm William Roberts. I'm the chair of the Renters Alliance. The Renters Alliance is the only organization in Montgomery County dedicated to renter, tenant advocacy, education, and outreach. And we were started years ago out of work done through the Tenants Work Group in Montgomery County, which is a collaboration that the then county executive pulled together to take a look at what was going on in the rental housing community, what policy issues were going on, et cetera. And one of the recommendations to come out of that group was that there was no organized voice for tenants. And so Matt Losak, our executive director, and lots of other tenant advocates came together and formed the Renters Alliance. And what we do is kind of threefold. We work with tenants all around the county to help them stand up tenants associations and teach them about their rights as tenants, rights and responsibilities. We advocate on behalf of tenants with the county government and the state government and in policy fights. And then we do sort of one-to-one sort of direct services and advocacy with tenants who unfortunately find themselves at risk of or in eviction proceedings or trying to keep people out of eviction proceedings, really. We're also, engaged in other outreach activities that we contract with the county for. I've been the chair of the board going on about 3 years now and been a member of the board for a handful more.
So do you think that as the pandemic restrictions are easing, there's going to be this sort of, what we've been warned about is that there's going to be this crisis of a lot of people being evicted all at once or having eviction proceedings begin against them. Do you see that as something that's coming, or do you think that the county and the state have adequately taken steps to try and mitigate that?
So, I think, I have to give credit where credit is due. I think the county has been trying to do a lot and has been trying to be as flexible, as they could with some of the federal and state dollars that they've gotten in. I think that the state's response in some cases has been pretty adequate, and in some cases has been kind of inadequate. We've had to push and pull on Governor Hogan more than we should have, frankly, to act faster to protect tenants during this crisis. And so, I really don't think, though, even with the funding that's available at the county level, and funding that's going to be coming, is coming from the federal government. Thank you, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. Estimates are that somewhere around maybe 200,000 evictions could be coming in the state. And so in Montgomery County, the estimates are about 20,000 or so of those, that we have as a conservative estimate. This wave is still coming. And it was, there was both an affordable housing crisis and an eviction crisis a year ago before COVID hit us, and COVID has just sort of exploded that. And so that wave is still coming. And so we, continue to try to push and pull and hoping that this federal money will be enough of a stopgap to catch a lot of those people, before they get into crisis and into court. The other thing that's happening right now, although we do have an eviction moratorium, some landlords are able to get around the eviction gating by using sort of a legal loophole called a tenant holding over case, which I won't bore you with the specifics, but basically, instead of taking you to court to evict you for some kind of breach of your lease, either because you haven't paid or for some other issue, and since I can't as a landlord during this moratorium in most cases, I could wait until your lease expires and basically take you to court as a tenant holding over case to be able to get you out. And there's nothing in the moratoriums that's stopping landlords from doing that. So it's just like a clear loophole, and lots of landlords are using it. There's a huge uptick across the state, not just in Montgomery County or in Baltimore City or other populous places, but across the state, there's a huge uptake in these cases. And some of the bills in Annapolis this session are dealing with that and trying to close that loophole and trying to help some of those folks. It's already happening. The wave is already here, unfortunately. And so our hope is just that, organizations like ours that are able to, we're even in this COVID environment, doing weekly public meetings and trying to do those geographically. So, as much as we can on Zoom, but trying to work with people on the ground in different geographic locations in the county. And so we've done some up county, focused on the Germantown, Montgomery Village area and tried to make sure we got that information out there. Because part of it is just arming people with the info. And, if you're one of these people in crisis, if you're one of these families in crisis who know that you're behind or afraid every day of what's going to happen, these systems are hard to navigate, which pot of money you're able to go to and where you can go for help, etc. So we're trying to do all that all that at once, trying to put people in the right pipelines, trying to connect people up with legal services where we can, trying to advocate with policymakers, because what we think we need all of it done in order to get some help to people.
What more you think can be done?
The impacts of this are going to be felt for a long time. And so I think this is also an opportunity for us to pause and kind of think through what the long-term answer to your question is, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is sort of short-term stuff. We're thinking about how to make people and systems whole long term requires like a more long term vision.
Well, thank you again so much for your time, Will. I really appreciate it.
That's all for this episode. The interlude and going out music for this episode comes from a new locally written musical, Sunflower, the story of Amalie and Vincent, which was composed by Washington, D.C. music teacher Premila Mistry and her formerly Northern Virginia-based collaborator Laura Gully. You can find the musical on iTunes. I'm very much looking forward to showcasing local talent and especially local music students on the podcast. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.
Everyone loves a hero. Vincent van Gogh is that for me. Even though his life ended tragically, he painted life with colors, humbly and creatively. And most of all, his painting inspired me. Everyone loves a hero, someone strong, someone brave, someone to look up to and save the day. I used to think that heroes meant a lot of friends and praise. They don't fail, they don't cry. I didn't know that maybe even I can be the hero I want to see. There's someone strong and someone kind inside.